talent is looking beyond a lifestyle choice. They also want to make a professional choice. Thanks for the great insights. I'd like to welcome Helen Lyons now, journalist from the Brussels Times, and she will be our next moderator for the talk between Tanguy Goretti, the founder of Cowboy, and Chris Wade, a partner at Isomer Capital. And Helen, I'd like to tell you this, because I heard that Tanguy, he loves boxing. He thinks we need to expose ourselves to our opponents. You might fail and get punched into the face, but that is what entrepreneurship is all about. So I guess you at least have one person that is a little bit addicted to adrenaline. So please keep it safe, don't box, but enjoy the talk.
Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Helen Lyons. I'm a journalist here in Belgium with the English language press, mostly writing for the Brussels Times, where I cover business. And it's hard to cover business in Belgium without mentioning Cowboy, especially here in Brussels, where, according to the European Startup Survey, 90% of active startups rate this city as more attractive and encouraging to entrepreneurship than Paris, London, or Berlin. And Brussels also happens to be where Cowboy was born. So for those of you who don't know, Cowboy is a Belgian startup. They make smart electric bicycles that are sold directly to consumers in Europe and now recently in the US. Some have called the Cowboy bicycle the iPhone of bikes. And if you know someone who has a Cowboy, then you already know everything about them because their owners are incredibly passionate about sharing the bicycle. So with me, as mentioned, are Tanguy Goretti, who's one of Cowboy's founders, and Chris Wade of Isomer Capital, whose independent and agile investments support high-growth technology startups within Europe's tech ecosystem, including Cowboy. You first invested in Cowboy back in 2018, and Isomer's renewed that and support in the years that followed, including most recently through direct investment in the 2021-2022 C round. So, Tanguy, Forbes has called the Cowboy 3 the slickest, smoothest e-bike around. But apart from making headlines for the quality of the product, Cowboy has been in the news because of the massive funding success that the startup has seen. In 2020, you raised $1.4 million in 12 minutes and more than $4.2 million in crowdfunding altogether just in that instance, which was 340% of the initial objective at a time when that was completely unheard of outside of the UK. And then this year, you've already raised $7.1 million with $2.7 again from crowdfunding, and you currently have over 4,000 investors. So doubtless, there's more than one entrepreneur in the audience wondering, what's your secret? What can others hoping to emulate this sort of level of funding success do to likewise set them apart from so many other young companies out there so that people like Chris can see them through the noise?
Yeah, so fundraising is never easy. There is no silver bullet. It's all about planning, execution, and obviously having a good business. But at Cowboy, if I look back, I believe we had to sell a different story at every stage of the process. And basically in 2017, when we started Cowboy, we had to sell the team, we had to sell the vision. So the idea was really to make sure investors could understand there was a gap in the market, in the bike industry, and that we were the right team to actually fill that gap and become a leader. So we contacted close to 100 angel investors at the time. We got like 85 no, 13 yes, and part of those investors, they're still there today, they're still investing in the company today, but they've really helped us kickstart the product and the company. And the crazy thing is that we had Hardware Club backing us from day one. Hardware Club is also backed by Chris, and it was key for us to have them because we didn't know anything about hardware. So my co-founders and I, we all come from the software industry, but we didn't know how to build hardware products. So Hardware Club really helped us at the beginning, 2017. And so in 7 months, we've built the first bike at Cowboy, and we actually went on to win an award at the biggest trade show of the bike industry. And so thanks to that, we did manage to convince other investors. And it was actually quite easy that time, because the good thing about hardware companies is that customers, but also investors, they can get what you're doing pretty quickly. And all it took for us was to do a test ride with a few business angels, but also VCs. And we're super lucky to have Martin Mignot on board at the time. So he just tried the bike, and I think that was it. That was all it took to convince him to invest. And the idea was really to set a clear milestone at every step of the process. So the seed, it was to build the first prototype, and then we wanted to launch the production in Belgium and prove the model and prove the traction. This is what we did thanks to Martin in 2018. And when we knew we had something, because basically the first batch of Cowboy bikes, it was sold in just a few months, we went on to raise again in the US this time. And that time, all it took was one meeting with Tiger, obviously. I think at the time it was quite fast, like even for them. So one meeting, the deal was done. They invested 10 million in the company, so we could scale and expand outside of Belgium. The partner we did the deal at Tiger was the one behind Peloton. And at the time, Peloton was performing like crazy, so they saw something similar in Cowboy, so that's why they invested in the company. So we expanded outside of Belgium. Germany quickly became one of the biggest markets, and that's when we went to raise a Series B, and that's also when Chris joined us on the adventure. So I think the key is really to set a clear milestone, show your target, and make sure that you deliver on them. And yeah, this year we've just raised 72 million in our Series C. To be honest, it was quite tough because of the context. I mean, everyone knows that it's more and more difficult, but for Cowboy, we had many supply chain issues. Actually, we had to, our customers had to wait up to 9 months to get the bike delivered because of those challenges on the supply chain. So it's going to be the first time actually in just 2 weeks that will be in stock. So if you want to buy a Cowboy bike, now is the perfect time. But yeah, we're getting there. And again, the key is to set a clear milestone at every step of the way.
Yeah, and so the pandemic definitely had an impact in terms of supply chains, but it also had somewhat of a positive impact in terms of cycling usage, which we saw boomed in 2020, including even in America, where I could say as an American, we don't generally use a bike to get around when we have giant SUVs that can do that for us. So how has that also sort of, did you guys, both of you, really feel a little bit validated in terms of how good this business was when you see it going where you expected?
I want to say something before I forget, because I'm of that age. How amazing is it that they've built one of the most beautiful hardware bikes in the world, and in 2015-16, they knew nothing about hardware. Are there any entrepreneurs in the room? Would you put your hands up? Isn't that impressive? It's almost as impressive as Tanguy saying, I've got this friend called Robin, who's got this thing called Tech.eu. We knew Tech.eu not well. They've got this conference. Look at you all. Isn't that amazing that you're all here doing this conference? Now I'll answer your question. But one more question. Could people put their hands up who have an electric bike?
Yeah,
okay, lots of customers, so let's quit the script and let's do a presentation on the product. Anybody got a Cowboy? We have some. I've driven it, it's amazing. You know, when we invested in Cowboy for the second time, Isomer is a fund of funds. We invest in early stage VCs that have incredible ambition. For those of you who've been around a long time, hardware is a dirty word in venture capital. Lots of money was lost in the early days on hardware. So to back a hardware-focused fund was interesting. But they built, with Tanguy and his co-founders, a remarkable company. We then get these quarterly reports that investors in VCs get, and we look at the stars. Not the stars up there, the stars in the portfolio. And we saw Cowboy. And every quarter we saw more bikes being sold, new models coming. I think we started on C1, we're now on C4, which is the models of the bike. And we thought, wow, there's something there. Now, to answer your question, sorry, Helen, when the pandemic happened, we thought, what the hell is going to happen here? Did we know that actually people would not want to use the metro systems in cities and would want to use electric bikes? And this was perfect for your bike. You built it for the urban environment.
Yeah, it was crazy to see the growth. And in Europe, we saw it, but I think in the US, it was even more impressive. If you look at the women cycling today in the US, 40% of them, they've started during pandemic. So you can see the impact of pandemic in the US. And I think this is crazy because in the US, once something is growing, you can see the speed, like it's much, much faster than in Europe. Like the adoption, it's just something different. And that's why we've launched there last year, because we believe we can grow with the market, even though it's still small today. Like last year, the market in the US was smaller than Belgium and Netherlands combined. So it just gives you an idea of how small it is today, but how big it can be tomorrow. So that's why we're there today. Yeah.
In the fund that we backed Cowboy, we have about 30 VC funds, slightly under 1,000 companies, so we look at an enormous amount of data. And what was really interesting in the pandemic, and I'm talking about 2020 here, was how some entrepreneurs got it. They adapted. They figured out the world had changed. There were some who didn't, and they're not around anymore. But these guys completely adapted, piled on sort of marketing when you'd say, wow, really? You want to market when everyone's living at home? But it worked.
Now, Chris, there's something special about...
You better take over again.
Yeah. There's something special about the investing relationship in here, which is that you don't just write a check and wish the company well. You're involved in helping them grow. So whether that's with helping in the C rounds by making introductions and convincing other people to join, but also in terms of helping them cultivate a good leadership team. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And do you see that, is this the better way to invest in tech startups?
No, look, VCs rule the world of investing. We're additive on top in capital. And we have been around a long time. We know a lot of people. We can introduce people. We can do things. And then very occasionally, serendipity happens. And everyone in this room has had a serendipitous moment at least once in their lives, hopefully many times. And this serendipity was, we decided, or they decided, that it was time for a CFO with more experience. And I'd happened to be on a board with a brilliant CFO, and I thought he would be perfect. I mentioned it to him. He says, I'm not working in Brussels. Now, I agree I'm taking my life into my hand by saying that, but it was the truth. But I said, what's wrong with Brussels? He said, I've promised my wife that I will not be traveling week in, week out to the job. He loved Brussels, actually. So when it came to the term of the recruiter, I said, can I, this is not the job of a limited partner, to be honest. There's a key word there, L, limited, which we perform very well, often. But I asked the CEO, could I join that initial headhunting meeting? Turns out the headhunter knew the candidate very well. And I said, look, we just have to convince him that actually he can do a CFO role in London. And we came forward, and a little bit of pushing and shoving in a good-natured way. I think he started on Monday.
Yeah, he just
and
started this
that's not us doing anything brilliant. That's just connecting two dots. That's all, really.
Tell me, what sort of difference has this style of investing made for Cowboy? Do you prefer it this way, or how do you maintain your independence?
Now's the
and
time to find out.
and control over your company with that level of involvement?
Yeah, I mean, we have more than 50 investors on board at Cowboy. We have more than 4,000 investors if I include the crowdfunding, so it wouldn't be possible to manage if everyone was as active as Chris. But something that we did really well from day one was to send those monthly newsletters to all our investors. And it's a 2-3 pages document. We explain how well the business is performing, but also we always start the email by asking a few things. It can be some help on a new hire. It can be an intro to a journalist, an intro to an influencer, or whatever. And basically, this is when people like Chris jump in and actually help us. And some of our investors, they're really active. They will talk to us every month. Some others will not hear about them for I don't know 2 years, and then they will go back and they will help us for the CVC. So that's why it's so important for us to keep that relationship and make sure they are always up to date on our challenges, so they can actually help us when we need them to do it. So yeah, that's how we do it.
I would just say to any venture capitalists in the room that would be very fearful of the idea of their investors interfering with the portfolio company, we have a very close relationship with Hardware Club, which is the VC that we backed, that how we found Cowboy. And in fact, before I was coming on stage here, I called up the general partner and said, hey, I'm doing this. Anything to be aware of? So we are very much in sync with our fundamental partner, which is the venture capitalist that backed Cowboy.
I want to go back to the quote mentioned when we were coming on stage, which is that you said you love boxing, and the reason is that you need to expose yourself to hit your opponent, and if you fail, you get punched in the face, which is exactly like entrepreneurship. And I'm wondering if you've had any black eyes with Cowboy, and what the role of the investor is in this metaphorical boxing ring.
Yeah, I mean, I love boxing because mostly you are in control. It's like everything in sport. If you eat well, if you sleep well, if you train correctly, you will perform. If you don't, just fix that and you will see progress. I think the difficult part for me at Cowboy the last 12 months was that even though you would do everything well, like some shit will hit the fan every month or two. We had the factories closing in Asia because of COVID. Then we had the logistics crisis. Then we couldn't buy the microcontroller for the bike. Then we couldn't buy the battery because the automotive industry was buying all the supply. And now you have the war in Ukraine and in Russia. And basically before we had to use the train through Russia, and now we can't. And again, every month or two, something happened. And I think the role of an investor, at least for me, is to be a good sparring partner. And the good thing about having someone like Chris or other investors on board is that they have a better macro view of the market. And I think we have a pretty good view of what's happening at Cowboy, but we need them to help us see the big picture and look at what's happening outside so we can better anticipate those risks. And in the current context, I think it's even more important to know that. So we're trying to use that knowledge as much as we can.
I built technology companies in the early 2000s, and everything has changed in building startups from that time to this time, and including the VCs. But one thing remains a constant, and that is building companies, however impressive, however wonderful, the truth is it's never a straight line. It's wonderful one month. It's disaster the next month. It then gets slightly better, and then it sort of wobbles about a bit, and then there's a big spurt up. And this is just the reality. And one of the things that you really have to think about as an investor in venture capital is think long term. Think that the world needs an Apple of e-bikes. It's going to come from a company in Brussels. They're going to sell millions. They will save millions and millions of tons of carbon dioxide, and they might just make a valuable company along the way.
Would you agree with that?
I mean, that's the plan from day one. Like we want to be the #1 in Europe. We want to be the #1 in the US, and we'll do everything we can to achieve that goal. That's for sure. Yeah.
Gotcha. So we're nearing the end of our time. Just, Tanguy, if you have any last takeaways or perhaps advice for other people in the audience who are starting companies in tech, what would you say to your younger self?
Yeah, just better anticipate those risks that you can't control and seek outside help. Like you can't know everything in your company, so that's why you have people like Chris being ready to help and just make sure that you squeeze that knowledge that they have so you can then use it in your decisions.
My advice is, if you have 1 gram of entrepreneurship, use it.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Are we off?
Thank you, Chris.
That was great.